Hi everybody. This is like our third meeting, I think. Anyways, we're gonna be continuing along with Python. But really quickly, for those who missed the last meeting or for the assignment last meeting, it was optional. The Python about me. We did post like a solution technically. So if you go over here and saw this post and it's on the GitHub. So this is GitHub if you have never used it before. Essentially, it's like you can think about it as like Google Drive, but for like coding, like specifically for like computer science, like code stuff. But anyways, here, if you clicked on the video, it would have taken you to the recording of the past meeting. That's a Python cheat sheet that we created a while ago. Instructions to download VS Code in Python, the online Python compiler, which if you haven't downloaded VS Code yet, or if you had issues downloading it, um, we would recommend you follow along with this one today, this online compiler, and you can do everything in here and click run, and it'll do everything as well. And you can type in here for inputs, but we don't have to worry about that right now. And in the about me assignment, so here's an example code that I made last week. So essentially, we create a couple of variables and it stores the name, age, hobby, and hours. And then it prints name, age, one of my favorite hobbies, and I spend around how many hours per day doing that hobby. So most of everyone who turned in the assignment had something pretty similar to something like this, and the code was pretty correct. There's like no wrong answer technically, because like the instructions like didn't ask for like super specific. So here's an example video of the code being run. To see in VS Code, if you run it, you can type in your inputs and it'll print out what is expected to be printed out. So you want to type in 2, it says I spend around 2 hours a day coding, which isn't really true, but that's the example. And so you can check all that stuff out on the GitHub, which is linked over here. But otherwise, we're going to get started today with VS Code. So if you do have VS Code and you open it for the first time, it should look something similar to this, somewhere along these lines. Make sure you have Python installed on your computer. If you don't, that's okay. But make sure you have Python installed, and also make sure in extensions, right? If you click on this like tab over here on the left, extensions, and you type in Python, um, make sure you have Python by Microsoft. So Python, Microsoft, it has 46 million downloads, and like make sure you have this installed in VS Code. Essentially, it allows VS Code to like run Python. Basically, it's very useful. To install it, I believe you just click this button. So to install it, if you don't have it installed already, it should look something like this, and you just click it, and give it some time, and it will be installed. I just uninstalled it and reinstalled it just to show. Yeah, so once you have the disable button or an uninstall button, that means you did it correctly. So now going back to our file explorer, the Explorer tab here. First thing you want to do is you want to open a folder. So I click open folder and then navigate to right somewhere on your computer where you want to like put it. So I'm just gonna put it on my desktop and I'm gonna create a new folder and I'll just call it coding. You can call it whatever you like. It doesn't matter as long as you know where the folder is. Okay, so if so there's a question. So if you don't have this, that's totally fine. Just follow along on the repo it. Just follow on the link that I sent earlier, which should have it here. Just follow along here once we start actually coding. But for now, those with VS Code, after you open your folder, right, mine is called coding, you see it says coding here, we can create a new file. And in a new file, it will have this tab bar here. And we can put main.py, or you could call it whatever. You can call it file.py, you can call it py.py. just make sure it ends in a .py extension, right? Because a .py extension tells the computer this is a Python file. And so now we can actually start coding. So now you can follow along on the online compiler if you want, or you can follow along with VS Code, or you could just watch. But one thing we didn't manage to properly cover last week. Oh, so if this pop-up shows up here, you can just ignore it. You can just exit. It doesn't matter. So one thing we didn't properly cover last week was variables. There are many different types of variables within Python. So variables, so that's a comment, right? Because we have the hashtag. So the first type of variables are integers. So in math class, you might have learned about integers already, right? They're essentially whole numbers with like no decimal places. So like 5, 1, 2, -15. Those are all integers, right? Stuff like 3.14, that's not an integer, that's a decimal. Or in coding, we would call it like a float. But so these are integers and those aren't. And to store an integer, we can just so basically variables are used to store data. And you can have many different types of variables, right? The first type is an integer. So var, which stands for variable, is equal to 3. So what that does is we have created a variable called var, and we have given it the integer value of 3. And so what variables do, right? By storing this data, by storing 3, we can access whatever is stored here repeatedly. So we can now print var. And if we save our file, Control S or file save, right? And we run in the top right corner, you should see it prints out 3. And this is useful because let's say if you want to print out or you want to access whatever's here multiple times, you don't have to manually hard code it, right? What if variable changes? What if you want to change it to 4, right? I can just change it to 4 and then it'll print out 4, stuff like that. And you can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with your variables as well, or with your integers as well. So let's say we wanted to add like 15 to the number 4. We would be able to do var is equal to var plus 15. Or we could just create a new var. So I'm actually going to change it to num1 and print num1, and then num2 equals num1 plus 15, which just makes it a little nicer to read. So now if I print num2, you can probably guess it's going to print out 19, right? Because 4 plus 15 is 19. So if I run it, you'll notice it prints 4, which is num1. Then it prints 19, which is num2. And let's print num1 out at the end as well. So you see it prints out 4, 19, and 4, right? Because num1 is unchanged because we set num2 equal to num1 plus 15. But num1 is still the same, which is 4. If you're okay, so pause real quick. If you're having issues like downloading VS Code or Python and all of that stuff, just don't worry about it for now. Just use the online compiler, the link that I sent earlier. We can help you out like personally, individually at the end to download it. But thanks for letting us know. Does Unity work? I'm actually not 100% sure because I've never used Unity Hub before. I'm not sure. I don't know if Unity Hub works. Sorry. I think you could try it, but yeah, I don't think Unity is exactly for Python. I would just recommend following along on the online compiler. Also, if you have a different IDE or code editor other than VS Code, like Atom or something else that supports Python, you can use it. It's totally fine. But if it doesn't support Python, we'd recommend you to get VS Code. So continuing on with our okay. So anyways, continuing on with our variables. So that was just some basic like integer, and then we had some operations, right? So addition. We can also do subtraction. So let's say we turn into subtraction. It becomes negative 11, which we expect, right? 4 minus 15 is negative 11. We can do multiplication, which gives us 60, which is correct again, right? 4 times 15 is 60. And then we can do division, which is also correct. It gives us 0.26, 0.2666. But beware when you do division, because you notice earlier I mentioned that integers are only whole numbers, right? So 5 to negative 15, 60, those are whole numbers. And decimals like 3.14 or like 0.2666, those are not integers. So num2 actually is not an integer, it's a float. But you don't have to worry about that for now. Just know that normally if you do an integer divided by another integer, it's going to automatically round down for you. But we'll talk about that a bit more later. So now moving on from these, I'll just comment it out real quick. So let's look at some strings. Strings are basically another word for like words or characters. So like in English, right, we have all those words. Those are called strings in Java. I mean in Python, sorry. So for example, stuff like hello, that's a string. The word Python is a string, like ABCD, like all of that, those are strings. Um, so we can call word one and we can set it equal to, let's say hello. But make sure when you declare your variable this time, you have to put quotations around hello. You notice how for integers, we did not have to put quotations because those were numbers. They don't need the quotations. However, for strings and like words, you do need the quotations around them. So word one equals hello. And then we can write print out word one. Um, okay, wait. Sorry. So some people are having some issue. Okay, so for those who missed it, when you open VS Code for the first time, it should look something like this. It should give you this get started screen, something like this. And what you want to do is you want to, yeah, thank you, Craig. So what Craig said basically, you create a folder anywhere, and you make a new file. Right. So I'll just demonstrate really quickly, right? So you can click Explorer, whatever, you can do File, and then you have to click Open Folder, and then go somewhere within your computer that like you remember. So for me, I put in my desktop and I created a new folder here. Or if you already have a folder, just select the folder. New folder, right click new folder and then select it. And once you select folder, it should open that folder. And then you can click this button right here, this new file button, or you can do file, new file, they both work. And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it like main.py. And so file, new file. So create new text file. Okay, never mind. Just do it the other way, where you click this button here. It's much easier. You click this button here and you type whatever you want, and make sure it's .py. And yeah, you can just use PyCharm instead. It actually is better, but VS Code is a bit more beginner friendly. So, anyways, that will get you to like how to be able to code in VS Code. So, anyways, back to the variables. So if we run the program, you notice that we can print out hello, right? But okay, so but this time with strings, let's say you wanted to add a string to like another string, right? Like you can't exactly do addition the same way we do addition with integers, right? Like 4 plus 1, that's obviously 5. But if we do like hello plus world, like how does the computer know? Like it doesn't really add up like how math adds, right? So we can see what happens. So let's say word2 is equal to word1 plus, and let's say world, and then we can print word2. And so you notice it does this thing called concatenation. Basically, it just joins the two words together. So if I were to put a space here, it will look a tiny bit better, right? Because it says hello space word. And then so once again, we can do the same thing where we can do print word one to show that, right? Word one, which is hello, is unmodified. Now, note this only works one way. Like if you try to do subtraction, it doesn't work. Um, the computer has no idea what you're doing because you can't subtract like a word from another, like a string from another string. So, and you can't do multiplication or division either. So you can only do addition with strings. Technically you can, but just for now you cannot. And so that's how you like concatenate or join two strings together. And then the last variable that we're going to quickly talk about are booleans. So booleans are true or false statements. And that's basically all they are. Um, there's only two options for a boolean, true or false. And they're mainly used in if statements, which we'll talk about later. So let's say bool equals true. And for booleans, make sure you do not put the quotations around. You notice how for strings, right, we had to put the quotations. For booleans, we don't want to put quotations because if we were to put quotations around them, the computer would just treat the variable as a string, which we don't want it to do. We want it to treat it as a boolean. So you notice how when I type true, it turns orange because it's like the computer knows that, okay, this is a boolean value. And if I were to print the boolean, it should just say true, and that's it. And I can change it to false, and it'll print false. And there's not much you can really do with the boolean unless we start working with if statements. So start if statements. If statements, you can think about them like as logic. Like, you know how us humans, we have logic. Like, so like, for example, right, if it's past 4 o'clock, right, then it's time to do homework, right? That's like an if statement, right? You say if, then you say then. And it's kind of the same thing in coding. So let's just start with numbers. So for example, we'll create a variable called x was set to 100 and y to 10. And we can do if x is greater than y. So right here, this x greater than y, that's a conditional. And x greater than whatever's in here always has to be a boolean. And x greater than y is a boolean because we're comparing two different numbers, right? Is 100 greater than 10? Yes. So it will come out as true. So if x is greater than y, then we can print x is greater than y. And if we run it, it should print x is greater than y. And so if I were to just print x greater than y, it should print out true, right? So you see right here, I printed out the conditional we have for the if statement, which is a Boolean, right? Because the computer outputs as true, which gives it as a Boolean value. Everything here in the if statement has to be a Boolean or has to come out to a Boolean, right? X greater than y is a Boolean. For example, if I just put something like if x, if or like if x or something, it's not gonna work because oh, oh okay, wait, this is kind of complicated. All right, just ignore the last part. Just know not to. Just make sure everything here has some sort of logic statement. And what I mean by logic statement, I mean by like greater than, less than. Okay, yeah. You need to install the Python extension here if to get like the colors and stuff. You can just type Python and just install the first one by Microsoft. All right, so anyways, continuing with logic statements. So these are the most common logic statements that we're going to go over. Equals. So if you want to compare if two things are equal, we use two equal signs, double equal signs, because one equal sign is all of this stuff where we assign a value to a variable. Double equal signs is comparing if the two objects or two variables are actually equal. And then we have not equals, which is the opposite. And it has an exclamation mark in front. The exclamation mark stands for not. And then we have less than, which is just the less than symbol. We also have greater than, which is the greater than symbol. And then we also have less than or equal to, which I assume we all know what that means, right? So that's less than or equal to symbol. And then we have the greater than or equal to symbol, which is the greater than or equal to symbol. So it's a lot like math. So any of these are able to be put in here. So for example, let's put x and y as 100, right? And this time it's going to print out false, right? Because x is not greater than y. X instead is equal to y. So for example, if I were to put equal signs here, then it should print, and we should change this, right? X is equal. And then so it should print x is equal to y. And we can also do, for example, greater than or equal to. And we'll notice that it prints out x is greater than or equal to y. It's pretty simple. And then the last thing we can do is we can check if something is, or we can check if something isn't true in our if statement. So we have an if, and we can also have an else clause. Okay, just for now, if you're having trouble with the VS Code, just don't worry about it. Follow along on the repo for now, because it's much easier. And then we'll be able to help you with your VS Code, your computer later. So lastly, we can also do like else statements. So an else statement is very similar to an if, except there's no conditional. So you don't put anything in between the purple and the colon, excuse me. So let's say else print the above statement is not true. So if we were to print this, right, the else wouldn't get run. You notice that this does not get run because only one of these runs, right? So for example, now if I were to put is x is greater than y, which we know is false, then we'll see that the second conditional, the second code block, the above statement is not true. This one gets run instead. And so that's how if else statements work. And there's also one last thing called an else if statement, or in Python is shortened to elif. This stands for else if. And else if does have a conditional as well. So let's say else if x is equal to y, then we print x is equal to y. So whenever you have like a conditional statement, like if, else if, and else, it's like this, then only one of these three print statements are getting run because only one of these are going to be true. Either the first one, x is greater than y, is true, or the second one, x is equal to y, is true. Or if none of them are true, this one will get run no matter what. And you can have as many else ifs as you want. I could have another else if saying else if x is less than y, then print x is less than y. And then we can change this one to x is greater than y. And so if we run with x and y as 100, we'll notice that, I'll just comment this out for now. We'll notice that the first one gets, or the second one gets run, x is equal to y. Now, if we increase y by 50, then we'll notice the second else if statement gets run, which is x is less than y. And then if we put it back where x is greater, so x is 200 now, then the first one gets run, x is greater than y. And the last one never gets run because there is no scenario where x is not greater than y, x is not equal to y, and x is not less than y. That just never happens, right? Because out of your, if you have two numbers and you compare them, it's either going to be greater, less than, or equal to. And we covered that in all of these. But if I were to comment out this else if statement, then when x is less than y, it will say the above statement is not true. Yeah, and that's conditionals. So if anyone has any questions,